Hi, everybody. Welcome to Millennial Think Tank. We are going to discuss how millennials consume news. And before we start, I'm going to frame the discussion a little bit, and then I'll introduce our panel. I have some data. It's not from Pew Research, so I'm not going to rely on it as heavily, but it's just some talking points. And things definitely are different in the way millennials, and I don't think it's just millennials. I think how everybody consumes news because of technology. So first, I'm going to focus on how millennials report that they consume political news, which is somewhat different than news in general. 30% of millennials still say they consume political news on television. Only 12% favor social media for political news, which I think is kind of interesting. 14% randomly Google the topic they're looking for and then select a news source. And 10%, and this is for political news only, rely on friends and family for political news and discussion. Now, when you move to mainstream news, and this data comes from Neiman Lab, this is for digital news, sorry, because this is really interesting to me. If you're going to a digital news source, 21% of millennials favor CNN.com as their main news source, 10% Fox, and then 54% favor other sites like Vice, Slate, BuzzFeed, and other sites in general. So the majority, the slight majority of millennials don't go to any sort of mainstream website. So first, before we get into it, and I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. So Daniel, can you tell us what you do, where you live, and where you fall on the millennial spectrum?
So I'm Daniel. I live in Toronto. I'm a growth manager at Newsrooms, which is a content marketing firm. And I'm also co-founder of steamfeed.com. And I'm 24, so I'm closer to the younger end of the millennials.
Yes, you are. Okay, and sorry, I'm off my thing. Celine, Helen, you're in. I was messaging you. There you go. Few tech problems. Can you introduce yourself? You got to unmute and introduce yourself, who you are, where you fall on the millennial spectrum, and what you do.
All right. I'm Helen Androlia. I'm from Toronto, and I am an older millennial. I'm 32, and I work as a social interaction strategist for a small boutique advertising firm.
Okay, great. Hetty?
Hi, I'm Hessie Jones. I work with Amy at our company. I am an older Gen Xer. What else am I supposed to say? Is that it?
That you're the CEO of our company?
Sure.
Okay, Joe.
I'm Joe Cardillo. I'm an older millennial, and I work in startups and product development, project management, and I also work with our team as well.
Okay, and Kiernan?
I'm Kiernan. I'm lower end of the millennials, 21. I work in a coffee shop, and I'm a full-time student.
And Lucy?
I'm Lucy Packard. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I am a biology graduate student, and I'm 20.
Wait, you cut out.
So
20. So you're a younger millennial.
The younger end.
Okay, and Tiffany?
Hi, I'm Tiffany Daniels. I work in communications and community relations for a nonprofit in Austin, Texas, and I am an older millennial. I remember the 80s.
Well, that's a great way of doing it as well. Sadly, I remember way too much of the 80s, and happily, there was no social media around to record a lot of what I remember. So first, I'm going to start with just a really basic question. I'd love everybody to answer this one, 60 seconds or less, but I'm going to ask two questions at once, because I think we have a lot to cover. Where do you turn for major news? So say something really big happens, like the Malaysian airplane that went missing, or something that is a global or even national news, a school shooting. Sadly, in America, we have to deal with that too often. Where do you turn for that type of major news? And then where do you turn for your general news updates? Like, tell me the difference between what you do when there's something big happening and then your regular, the way you keep updated on your standard, daily news pattern. So Daniel, I'm going to start with you.
So I used to get most of my news through television, and kind of stopped over the past year I didn't have a TV for 8 months, and I stopped watching cable, so I kind of lost my news source that way. Usually when it's major news, either somebody at work will bring it up or I'll hear about it through social networks, and then I'll look at reputable sites. So in Canada, I'd probably look at something like CBC or CTV or Globe and Mail or even CNN or anything like that. And just general other news usually comes through my social feeds. I'll look at the link where it's from, and I'll look at the headlines, and usually that's enough to consume. Once you see 4 or 5 variations of a headline and you read the description, usually you get the gist of the story, and if I want to learn more about it, I'll click on one of the ones.
So what social, just real quick though, what social network are you primarily in when you're getting that? Or are you just talking about all of the different sites that you spend time on regularly?
So I would say probably most of my news appears first on Facebook.
Huh.
Because that's probably where I spend the most time just kind of connecting with others, and it just ends up popping up in my news. Now, it kind of skews the news for me because Facebook decides what news is important, which is kind of why I miss my news on the TV, because I don't get the complete feed anymore. But
that's interesting. So do you hear that, all of you gross generalizers out there? There's a millennial who spends a lot of time on Facebook connecting with people. So, okay, that's interesting. And on Steam Feed, Susan Silver wrote a really great post about algorithms and how they work, especially on Facebook, which I think is fascinating if anybody wants to understand more how that works. Okay, so Helen, I'm going to ask you the same questions, major news versus your daily routine or weekly routine for news consumption.
Well, so I, because I'm also online all day, I generally find, though, Twitter is usually what I follow instead. So in addition to, following people in my interest networks, I also follow a lot of people who I consider to be reputable sources for news, various writers, various reporters, and so I do often spend a lot of time on Twitter, and they'll often be breaking stories, often before they get to the paper. But although I also do not have a television, well, I have a TV. I don't have cable. If there's something really big going on, I'll actually go over to my boyfriend's because he has cable, and I'll watch it.
He's an extra. And then he's an extra, so he has cable.
Yeah, exactly. Well, also because he likes the sports, whereas I will just go across the street and have a beer and watch my basketball. But so I'll watch the news with him if it's a really big ongoing story. But most of the time I just follow Twitter, and then of course I also have various paywall access to a couple of reading actually the paper. So I also subscribe to the Toronto Star, the New York Times. And there's one more. It's really going to bother me now.
You're not Sarah Palin. We get it. You read. So
I do read.
So I have a question though. So the writers, when you said there are certain writers that do you mean journalists or do you mean bloggers?
Mostly a combination of both. Okay. So it's Toronto has a very sort of vibrant news scene. We have a number of major outlets, and there's various writers who I know follow the political scene. They follow large news stories. So I do have a curated list of people who I also follow as well. And also some more, one of my other favorites is a guy, and he writes fantastic Twitter essays about larger news stories going on.
What's his name?
On.
You cut out a little.
So instead of reporting news, sorry, I was going to report larger news.
What's his name? Okay.
And he will wait till the end of the day and then essentially write these lists, these essays, all about major news stories. And I think the way that he approaches the news on Twitter is fascinating, and he's just as sensitive and well-read as most of the journalists working right on the story. So I have various sources, but it's mostly Twitter and traditional news sources online.
How do you curate? When you said you curate, do you have a program that you curate, or you're just talking about you have them coming to your inbox? You said I curate certain writers that I read.
Well, I put them on lists. So I go through them later. And of course, there's also, hashtags I follow as well. So as we all know, Toronto has a crazy political scene. So I've had TO Polly running in my tweet deck just so I can keep track of what's been going on during the elections, which are over now, thank goodness. So.
Yes, and your political scene, it gives me the few chances I have to feel superior to Canadians, but I'm afraid that a lot of that's ending because Rob Ford's going away. So sad
That's
me.
okay. We still have the Bermuda shorts of mayors, so
Okay.
if anything, you can just make fun of us for being boring.
No, Canadians are not boring. And I forgot to introduce myself, so I'm Amy Tobin, VP of Content and Strategy at our company. One of these hangouts, I'll remember to introduce myself. But Hesse is an Xer, a very tech-savvy Xer. So Hesse, answer the same questions for me, please.
Okay.
Major news versus general news consumption.
Okay, so some of the biggest news I get from Twitter, but if I want to get the full news story, I usually pop over to the TV, and I will go to CNN or one of the major programs. General news, I think these days, I do have an RSS feed that I pull from Feedly, but one thing that I do like right now is Flipboard. That tends to give me everything that I want in the general news. So, but Facebook is also a big referral source for me because a lot of people end up talking more about the news in there, especially some of the big stuff, like when Gian Gomeshi. I had no idea what was going on from there, and sometimes that ends up being a big referral source for me as well.
Okay. And Kiernan, can you answer those two questions as well?
I'm sorry, what are the questions again?
So where do you get your major news when there's a major news event? Where do you turn? And then what's your standard daily consumption of news? Where do you go for that?
Yeah, I don't have a TV or anything, so I guess the first place I probably go to is the BBC. The BBC has a nice little mobile app, and I like that. Then I might go to Russian television. I like to go there a lot. Sometimes I'll check out some Al Jazeera, and rarely I'll go to CNN. But I also like to check out like Z Magazine. They have some pretty interesting articles. Every now and again. But that's primarily where I get my news from. I don't really like going to so many American sources. I feel like it's pretty biased.
Okay, so you don't have a television, and neither does Daniel. So do you not have a television because of economic reasons, Kiernan, or was this some sort of a choice?
Well, I don't understand why you need a television. You can just bootleg anything worth watching,
Okay.
whenever you feel like it.
And Daniel, why do you not have a television?
So it was economic reasons. I just bought a new TV 2 weeks ago, and I'm looking to get cable again, but I don't want to pay like $50 a month when most of the time I watch TV shows or movies from Netflix. So unless they come out with some sort of like $10 a month package just for a few channels, then I'm just not going to get cable.
Okay. All right, and we talked about that in the sports. I think that's a common pattern in the sports hangout last week. Millennials do not like for paying for crap. Well, no one does, but paying for packages when you're only going to use part of it. Okay, so Lucy, can you answer those two questions? Where do you turn to for major news breaking versus what you do on a daily basis or weekly basis or however you consume? And we lost Lucy, maybe? All right, Tiffany, we'll go to you for those two questions now, and then I'll come back to Lucy when she comes back in. There's something sneaky going on with G+. Everyone's getting kicked out. I hope I don't. Hang on, Lucy. We're going to go to Tiffany and come back to you, okay?
Okay. Okay. Well, I think like everyone else, I'm online all day for work. I do have a television, but I don't have cable. So most of my breaking news or major news is first online, usually through Twitter, sometimes through Facebook, but more of the stories I get on Facebook are not timely, just unfortunate. So that's kind of how I'll find out about, some situation with a teacher and a student or something in another state or something ridiculous like that. But the breaking news I'll get primarily through Twitter, and then I will go to what I consider to be more reputable sites. So I'll visit CNN, I'll visit NPR, I'll visit the BBC to try to get a better idea of the truth behind those stories as much as I can. And then as far as just kind of regular news, I'm going to laugh because it's definitely an older thing and not so much a millennial thing, but I still get a magazine called The Week. And the reason I like that magazine is that it is for folks like me that want to pretend that we're fully informed but don't put in that much effort or don't find that much time. And what it does, it's a weekly magazine, obviously by the week, and it kind of cuts through smaller explanations of national and international news, big stories, whether it be political or just public interest. And the nice thing about that magazine, even though it leans a little liberal, which is okay with me, but they do have kind of the facts, and then they'll have an essayist from one side and an essayist from the other side of whatever that issue is, so you can kind of at least get some idea of both sides' vision, and if I'm interested in it, then I'll go find more information. If not, I can pat myself on the back for staying somewhat informed and move on to the next activity.
I have never heard of that magazine. That's interesting. And I do want to...
When I was in college and in one of my political science courses, and I've just maintained it since then.
Okay.
And it takes a couple hours to read each week, and I think it's worth it for me.
Yeah, and we'll come back to magazines as well. So Lucy, and G Plus is kicking everyone out, so don't feel bad. But so breaking news versus regular news consumption.
So I try not to spend too much online. I don't really do social media, so most breaking news I'll hear the stories from colleagues or friends, and then I'll Google them to look them up. And I used to spend a lot of time listening to BBC, but it got too depressing, so I've cut that out the last couple of months.
Yeah, huh. So do you ever go on New Mexico Compass, which is Joe's startup?
I do on occasion. I get some stories from there, yeah. It's Joe's connection.
Okay, so it's too depressing. So so if you're not doing the BBC, do you do any regular news? Because one of the things I go ahead. Are you going to answer?
Oh, I'm sorry. What was that?
Well, I was asking since you turned away from the BBC because it's depressing.
You.
You can't hear me? All right, can everyone hear me? Is it just Lucy?
Because it's what? I'm sorry.
I think you're having...
No, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm going to move to another topic now. So... Okay, so Tiffany just talked about the week and trying to stay up to date, and of course we have more information coming at us than ever before. I just want to ask you all, how up are events? I mean, Kieran, since you're listening to all these different global news sources, right, which I think is interesting, how up are you? For instance, we just had the elections here. How often do you, or how, I guess I'm saying, if you're going to give yourself a 1 to 10 rating, how up are you on current events, both nationally and internationally? I'm asking you, Kieran.
I mean, I'd say that I'm pretty fairly up to date, on most events. I mean,
like compared to your peers, would you sit with your peers? Do you have a student union? Do they have those at American schools, like a hangout? Would you sit around and talk about current events with your peers?
I mean, probably not with most of my peers. I don't know. We don't really talk about politics that much in most of my circles. It's pretty depressing, and I go to a really conservative school, so I'm pretty much sure that most people have really volatile opinions that are in contradiction to my own. So I'd rather not open that can of worms. So most of my, political talks are just me brooding to people who are completely clueless about what I'm talking about.
Well, okay, so what about on social? Do you talk about it on social?
Yeah, sometimes I'll make some statements on social media about, political things that interest me, but, even then it's just kind of me brooding. It's not really, I don't know. I don't really think. I'm not really
okay.
An activist. I just like bringing people's attention to certain things.
Okay. I mean, does anybody else talk regularly about politics and current events on social? Okay, Helen, jump in. So it's mostly on social?
No, no. I mean,
Oh,
Hessie's known me, and we've been friends on social and for a long time. So Hessie knows I'm actually really very politically active. And I mean, I not only do I have an enormous number of opinions, of which all are correct, but I also work a great deal with a couple of political parties here in Canada, and I mean, and not to make everything like, oh, my boyfriend, but with my boyfriend's work as well. He's also very politically active as well. For those who have not met me before, he's a sociologist, a professor. So between the two of us, I'd say we're both fairly politically active and up to date. And I mean, I wouldn't say that I know everything that's going on in the world, but I would give myself like a hearty 7 out of 10. I would feel confident with that.
okay. So Daniel,
Yes.
I want to ask
Just to be the fool.
Daniel, I want to ask you, because your job is in social and because you have a startup in social, do you ever talk about current events? Which, whenever you say current events, it really means politics in most cases. Do you engage in that on social or in real life? It's like you have a difference. No.
No, usually I don't. That's one of the topics I try to stay clear of. Just because
For personal brand
so many people that have strong opinions that I just don't agree with, and it's like people said, I don't want to.
Now I
Especially where it's such a public place, and if I say something and 200 people disagree with me and they start attacking my profile and all that stuff, then anybody can see that. My colleagues, my parents, my friends. It's not as private as people think. Like if it was like 2 or 3 people, just
Well, what if it was in real life then? Would you talk about things like that in real life with your friends and family?
Not that much. I've never been big on following politics. It's just one thing that I was just never really interested in, and a lot of my friends are kind of the same. Sometimes we'll talk a little bit about politics at work, just because of like at newsrooms we have a lot of journalists or ex-journalists and producers that work with us, so they follow that type of stuff. So we'll chat a little bit about it at work, but that's about it.
Okay.
Can I make a statement here, Amy?
Yeah.
And politics is one of those subjects that's, to me, it's sensitive, because not only do you have to be well informed, and I watch your own Facebook feed because you follow this stuff and you can actually argue the points. The fact is that not everybody follows it. Yeah, you. And so if you don't follow it religiously, I mean, to Daniel's point, you don't want to be attacked if you don't know all the issues, right? And you can't defend a particular stance. And so that's one area that I tend to stay away from, because from my perspective, I actually don't really care. I don't even know my own mayor of Pickering, to tell you honestly. So I don't really care about some of those issues. But from the perspective of just being political, it tends to be one of the subjects that I think a lot of people stay away from, just because it's highly sensitive, right? So
Okay, so Tiffany, so I'm guessing you don't do it on social either because you're quite private, right? But what about in real life?
I don't seek it out in real life, but I don't hide away from it either. A lot of my friends, even my boyfriend, we have very different political views in a lot of different areas, and so I am a debater, so that can get me in trouble, but I really enjoy debating topics with people and seeing if they know as much about it as they think they do. And I fully recognize that I may not always be right, or I may not always be fully informed, and until I have a conversation about it, I may not see another view or fully understand why that person came to that conclusion. So I enjoy the conversation because it helps me also understand the thought process of the people I'm working with, and those would be people I care about. Those would be my friends. Those would be my family. I'm not terribly interested in engaging a stranger or a casual person that went to high school with me 10 years ago and was a year younger than me and some crazy political rant, even if I agree with it, there's probably going to be something that is too extreme that I don't want my name tied to.
Yeah, I think.
I want someone else
so
speak.
I wanna address that, because so I'll start by answering both of your questions, Amy, since I don't think I got a chance to hop in. But so I get most of my news.
I'm sorry,
No, it's fine.
Joe.
I don't really. So I get most of my news from Twitter, same as Helen. I often follow like a pretty select group of people that I trust over time, that I know that they will often be interested themselves in presenting like a variety of views, and not just what they think the problem is or the issue is or what happened, but they're interested in like sort of unfolding the approach to a particular issue or topic, whether that's politics or a world event or whatever. And so that's the people I trust the most to get news from. A lot of them are actually journalists, right? A lot of them are longtime journalists, but not all of them. Some of them are just really seriously perceptive people. And if I can get a video, like a live stream of what's happening, if it's a major news event, I'm most interested in seeing that myself and then getting context for it. So that's kind of how I treat my major news stories. That's kind of how I get my regular news as well. And then in terms of being informed, that second question, I don't actually think I'm the most informed person, but I've made a decision not to consume as much information as possible. And so I'm sort of actually backed off. And I would say I'm probably like I consider myself like a 6 or 7 out of 10. If you were asking me, what did I know everything that was happening at a given moment?
And you made that decision because it was too depressing?
No, for me, it just couldn't deal with it, couldn't handle it. I mean, I can't do anything about what's happening in D.C. half the time when it's like political gridlock. And so unless I can see some stake in it for me, something that I might be able to do or some outcome that I might have, I try to just focus on things that are super relevant to things that I might be able to work on.
So is Twitter that main place where you go when there's something happening, you go check your Twitter stream for live news updates or live updates? Is that what you're doing?
Oh yeah, because stuff breaks on Twitter faster than
yeah.
You'll never see anything on the front page of CNN that you didn't already see on Twitter if you're following the right people.
Yeah, and so here's the question I had about that, because I think Daniel, no, it wasn't Daniel, Helen, someone else does the same thing. I do the same thing. I go to Twitter right away, especially when it's something that Anonymous is involved in, or there's something that the government might not want exposed right away. So how reliable do you? How much double checking do you do? Because that's why I asked you, Helen, whether these people were bloggers or journalists, because there's been a lot of discussion about the different standards. You know, there was a time when journalists had high standards, and you know, bloggers don't necessarily have to adhere to that code. So how reliable do you see that Twitter feed? When Ferguson happened and Anonymous exposed who they said was the police shooter, and it wasn't the right person. You know, those sort of things give me pause. That's why I wonder, what do you do if you read something on Twitter? How do you verify? Joe, Helen, anyone who does that regularly?
Well, I know for me at least, and the dissemination of misinformation on social and the internet as a whole is something that I'm really actively interested in, because there's sometimes just honest mistakes, or people in the rush to be first, and sometimes that rush to be first, I think, supersedes the due process that we would have had, say, 50 years ago when it came to publishing an article in the paper at the end of the day. Especially, I think personally when we see, you know, on Facebook the manipulation of images, you know, taking one image from another news story, adding a text to it to present a certain idea or push a certain agenda. But when it comes to reporting, I find, and for, I should clarify, what I was saying before that I have a lot of debates, it's partly just because that's sort of the world that I move in. It's just sort of, I don't actively seek it out. And I rarely actually retweet or share the news. I'm usually more of a passive observer when it comes to the news. Unless, of course, I have something that I just really get off my chest. News cycle. And that usually what is trending on Twitter won't necessarily be entirely accurate for a couple of hours. But at the same time, I also think that, you know, when we watch something like the news, like CNN, because I think CNN is a perfect example, when there's something that's big that's happening, there's this huge rush to kind of just keep filling the airwaves with some kind of information. And so they're just making up stuff as they go along. Like, they even say, like, we have no idea what's going on, but you can see these guys walking over here. And it's really no better than early steps of Twitter. Then you consume news, whether you do it digitally or you do it through television or however you choose to do it, is just remember that when a story breaks, it's not going to be finished, or you're not going to have the full impression for at least several hours. So disseminating that information is usually a really poor choice overall. You should always take everything with a grain of salt.
Okay, so of the major news channels, are there any of them that you see as more reliable than others? And of course, people are going to have different opinions, but does anybody have a strong opinion on that? And we could talk about, I shouldn't say major, because gone are the days where ABC, NBC, and CBS and public television were it. I'm talking about the major cable news channels, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, and any of the other mainstream non-cable news networks. Does you see a difference? Does anyone see a strong difference in each in reliability or not? Are they all, Daniel, you're smiling, are they all CBC, they're the best? Okay. That's what the Canadians think.
I have opinions on that. I mean, I'll go right through a few for you. CNN, it's just crap. I don't trust anything on CNN. I mean, I trust them to tell you that something's happening, and maybe here's what might be. It might involve this. That's it. That's as far as I go with them. It's the crappiest site. I never go to CNN. I don't even go there to see what's breaking, really. Occasionally somebody tricks me or rickrolls me into going there. But I implicitly trust people that show their sources, that show that it's more than just their presentation that is involved. And so that's going to involve if there's documents that are embedded that are primary source where I can go look at them. Oh, cool. Okay, all right. Well, that's what the Department of Homeland Security actually did because it's part of the open records. If there's video, if there's photo, if there's other sources that I can go and sort of cross-reference and check with the story, that gives it a lot more traction in my mind. But I still don't think you can ever trust one source, and that seems to me to be different from older folks that I know. I would never, under any circumstance, no matter what the outlet, just read one article. I'm constantly going to Google News. If there's like a topic or a problem, I'll read 4 or 5 articles minimum just to see if there's a difference in the way they're presenting it.
Do you ever go to PBS? Because there's some discussion in the chat, because we have these Canadians on here who are talking about the CBC, and I'm familiar with it, and it's publicly funded, correct? 100% publicly funded? Okay. And so in the States, we have public television, which is not 100 publicly. It's a misnomer because it isn't. It's mostly funded through donations. It's not funded from the government, put it that way. Do you think, especially Canadians, I want to hear, do you think that matters that it's publicly funded and they're not being funded through advertisement dollars? Do you think it has an impact on how reliable they are compared to, my dog is on the coffee table, how reliable they are compared to American news channels like Fox and MSNBC?
I myself don't see any difference. I mean, I still go to CTV and Global, but I think I've always thought that the level of quality from the CBC was always there. I mean, but I do what Joe does. I actually check with different news sources just for validation, because I never really rely on one opinion. Especially one thing with the CNN that they do is they kind of just take one side of the story, and they milk that side until there's nothing else to say. So I tend to look at it from different viewpoints, and then that's why I end up turning to other channels. But I don't think funding or no funding has anything to do with the quality. I think I just don't never rely on one source regardless.
All right, so Kieran, I want you to go. Go.
Well, there's a thing there, because when you look at a network like CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, any one of these really big corporate-funded, media outlets, they have an obligation to show a certain side of the story that, let's say, any person with a brain might not want to show. You can go back and you can trace this whole global warming debate. There is no debate. The climate is changing, and 99% of scientists agree with that. But these people go on CNN, and there's like this systemic format that they're bound to follow, where they divide things that aren't really issues into two opposing sides, and they debate them when there is no debate. It's going on, you know, and this is why you need to check multiple media sources for different sides of different stories. Like if you go on Russian television and you read about, you know, what's going on in Ukraine right now, I mean, it's pretty horrifying. And then, of course, it's biased. It's coming from the exact opposite type of opinion. But if you can look at the way that an American media would talk about the idea and the way that this Russian media talks about the idea, and then even go in there and see the Al Jazeera perspective, it still doesn't make any sense. It's still completely crazy. But you get this greater sense that your government has its own reasons for doing the things that it's doing. The corporations have a reason for reporting the news in a certain type of way. And I don't think that anybody is nefariously, you know, orchestrating these things. It's just the way that media system exists. Like if you work in the White House press room and you're going to go and you're going to get interviewed by the president, you're going to be able to ask the president, you know, questions directly. You're not going to ask anything that might be, you know, pertinent. You're not going to ask anything that might jeopardize your opportunity to be in that room because you've never been.
You might once, but you won't the next time when you're cut out of access, right?
Yeah. Okay, and Joe, do you want to ask some of those questions you put in the chat? And I do want to move you guys to other forms other than digital too. But Joe, talk about.
Yeah, I mean, what makes I would wonder, like, what makes each of you sort of trust a news source? And Helen, you had something to say on that, I think.
Well, I was gonna, for me, a lot of it's tone. I mean, I know that sounds very silly because you can read the same script with different tones, but I mean sort of the overall tone. And part of the reason why I like the CBC is that I find a lot of their reporters and their anchors, it sounds vague, but they feel reliable. They feel even-keeled. I don't feel like they're pushing an agenda. For me, I find too often with American news sources, I find they like to take their reporting seriously. It's obvious that Fox is very right and very Republican and very almost hysterical, and MSNBC has this sort of almost smug leftiness to it. And I mean, I am a smug lefty, and even I'm like, oh, stop it. So for me, a lot of it has to do with what Hesse was talking about, this balance of both sides, this sort of willingness to listen, and this sort of calm reporting. Because I find that often, like we had our own shooting a couple weeks ago, and at the same time, you know, there was this sort of comparison where everybody was, again, this idea of like, all right, breaking news, guy walking over there, everyone's dying, maybe, who knows? And Canadian news was not like that at all. It was very careful and cautious and very clear.
Does anybody consume their news from Jon Stewart and Colbert at all? How many people? Like, raise your hand if you watch.
If I'm never watching Fox News or CNN, it's on the Colbert Report.
It's what?
If I'm watching a soundbite of Fox News or CNN, it's off of Jon Stewart or the Colbert Report.
Well, because one of them, I don't remember which one, did a really funny thing on the Ebola reporting versus the BBC and how it was reported in the UK versus how it was reported in the US with the hysteria. And there was some meme about more people have married a Kardashian than have died of, more Americans have married a Kardashian than died of Ebola, which is pretty funny and true. So I just wanted that. But I want to shift because we talked a lot about television, of course, because for many years it's been the main source of news. Do any of you read a newspaper? And I mean a paper one. I know Helen reads a newspaper. Raise your hand if you read a paper newspaper still.
Sometimes I stop and they give away free issues of the New York Times, you know, and I'll pick one up. Well, at university.
Oh, okay. And Tiffany, at the New York Times at a conservative university, that's interesting.
Yeah, well, you know.
Tiffany, what do you read?
I really just read the local paper here, but that's for work. So I do get information that's not related to what I'm looking for, but I'm not reading the newspaper for my own personal gain. I'm reading it to make sure that I'm keeping up to date with what I need to do for work.
Okay, and so how many of you listen to the radio? Like, this is one thing I wanted to know. In the old days, and I think still, and this is why you know, radio advertising costs a lot more on the morning drive-in, is people are in their vehicles commuting. I know a lot of millennials don't commute like that now, but driving in, and so that's a very expensive time spot to advertise. Last week, it was interesting when we talked about sports. One guy, Kelly, who doesn't want to pay for a bunch of junk he doesn't use, Daniel, just like you, and refuses to pay for cable, and would pay for sports if he could buy just what he wanted, listens to the radio for sports because he has access and it's free. Do any of you listen to NPR for news, or regularly listen, like in the morning when you're getting up? What are your routines? What are you doing? Because you cannot be online when you're actually getting dressed and taking a shower and the hair, blow drying your hair, right? So what are you doing then? What's playing? I'm assuming it's not silent. So tell me about that. Tell me about your routines.
Well, for me, it is silence while I'm getting ready because there's other people that don't get up as early as I do. But when I'm in my car, I have between a 20 and 45-minute commute, depending on how Austin traffic feels like acting that day, and I'll listen to NPR on my way to work in the morning.
Okay. Anybody else? Daniel, what do you do? What are you doing when you're getting ready in the morning?
This is a little bit sad, but I get up and I power up Steam Feed and I start working.
No, but when you're getting ready. I'm talking about when you have to actually shower because you must shower, right?
It's like
At some
a 3-minute deal. Like you don't have time to do anything. Like it would take me just as long to find a radio station than it takes as long to shower. I'm a guy, you know. I just wash my hair, It's quick.
You don't have a radio, Daniel.
I don't have a radio. That's another thing. I don't have a radio.
You don't own a radio.
I actually, and this is one thing, I actually feel a little bit disconnected since I'm not in university anymore. And so when I was in university, I would be at home during the summer, and my parents have a newspaper, and I loved reading the newspaper first thing in the morning. They had cable and satellite TV, so you know, if I was about to start work, I would put on BNN or something like that, Business News Network. And then driving to work, I would turn on the radio and get news. And now, you know, I'm graduated, I live in the city, I don't have a car.
You have no money, hardly.
I don't have radio. I don't want to pay for a newspaper subscription because it's actually kind of expensive to get a newspaper. So it's pretty much whatever Facebook decides that is newsworthy. That's the news that I get. Like the big major news for me this week was that Taylor Swift pulled her record from Spotify.
You know what? That is a great question. What was the major news for everyone?
Sorry, what did you say?
That is a great point that you made right there. I did see that she pulled her music from Spotify, which means, I mean, I know what it means, but I don't really know what it means in the grand scheme of things. What was the major news story for everyone this week? Does anybody have something major that besides the elections that they were paying attention to? No. Okay. All right. So so Daniel, if you had the money though, right? So you make it big. Steam Feed actually monetizes someday, right? And it pays off. What are you getting? Are you getting the newspaper, satellite radio? Are you buying all that stuff because it doesn't matter? Is it an economic choice purely that you're disconnected?
Yeah.
In Toronto, and
I would definitely get cable because my morning routine when I was still in Halifax was we had cheap cable there. Was when I got up, I made breakfast and turned on the Business News Network and watched it for about 45 minutes before I headed to work, and then I drove to work and turned on the radio. So if I could choose one thing to get back connected with what's going on, it would be TV, so I can put the business news on.
Okay, I think you're putting your hand over your speaker because you're like loud, then it's like, and then I can't hear you. Okay, all right, I want to move to magazines really quickly. So Tiffany reads The Week just so she can make sure she keeps up to some degree with what she has to read. Does anybody have a monthly magazine like the Atlantic Monthly or a news magazine, Time magazine, for God's sake?
Mad magazine.
I read The Economist.
Okay, every month. Subscription, Joe, or you just pick it up when you can?
Online. It's subscribed.
Okay. Does anybody else subscribe to a magazine? I was interested, Helen, you subscribe to the New York Times, right?
Online.
Online.
Although the boyfriend does subscribe to the analog version, and so I do like the magazine that comes with it. But I do read The Atlantic, and but most of my monthly stuff, like I like McSweeney's. I feel like I consume news so much on a regular basis that when it comes down to outside of work time, I get a little. I want to turn off after a point.
Because if I used to get so many magazines, I was like a junkie, and all the information you consume now, how is that impacting news magazines? I mean, obviously, a lot of them have fallen by the wayside. But is there one or a few that are absolutely essential because it's different? Like I'm picturing Tiffany reading The Week. For me, there are a lot of places that I can't read digital, right? I can't take a tablet to the beach. But I can inform myself if I still had a magazine subscription. Are there any besides The Atlantic and Helen that anybody reads? Like, Hessie, do you read a magazine?
No, I don't. Unless it comes as an, I don't know, Toronto Star. If it's free that week, I'll read it. But half the time, I end up just rolling it up and putting it back in the recycling bin because it's just not something that intuitively I go to. Right? Everything is online.
Forget the paper ones then. Like, who pays for a magazine subscription? I pay for Vanity Fair, but I get it on my Kindle. I know it's not really hard news, but there are current event news stories that are really in depth in Vanity Fair. Does anybody have a subscription to a paid subscription where they consume news, or is it all free? Besides Joe gets The Economist, Helen gets New York Times. That's it?
I subscribe to Mad Magazine.
That is not news.
Yes, it is.
But I think Kiernan makes a good point. Like, one of the subscriptions I have, aside from McSweeney's, is Art Forum, partly because I'm a pretentious jerk, but also partly because the consumption of that kind of media doesn't translate into the digital space. So large-scale magazine with large glossy photographs and high-quality prints, and so it's like I would never go out of my way to have a subscription to something if I can have an equally good experience digitally. But if I can get a different experience, a better experience with paper, then that is what I will get. But it seems pointless to waste the paper otherwise. So I think maybe it's just a matter of news is becoming more digital because it is recycled so quickly. Part of of recycling, and things become irrelevant so quickly. Whereas magazines, when people do subscribe, it's because they need to get something from it that they can't get otherwise, or something from it all really just depends on the medium, I think, and what the purpose of the medium is.
All right, so this is a question Joe gave me before we started. So when you're information overload, which it sounds like everyone here is online a lot. Well, Lucy dropped out, and she was the one person who isn't online a lot. What do you do when we overloaded from all of this? What do you do when you have information overload? Like Helen, you said you read so much. I think it was you, that when you get out of work, you don't really want to go and read The Atlantic or something. What do you do? Like, Daniel, what do you do to turn off?
Play music, watch TV, play video games.
You don't have a TV.
Oh, no, Netflix. Netflix on TV. That's what I consider TV.
Okay, sorry.
But yeah, it's usually just very mind-numbing things that that I don't need to think about it, right? It's like you said, we consume so much information in a day, and by the time you're done work and you read probably 20 articles, 40 articles in a day, plus you're on social networks and stuff's coming at you, and you're like,
that is such a great question I didn't ask. How many articles do you think? I mean, you have to read a lot, Daniel, and so do Hessie and I. I mean, it's kind of our world. But Tiffany, how many news articles, or what you would consider news articles, sometimes they're more pop news, pop culture. How many articles do you think you read a day?
Safely 20.
Yeah. Kiernan?
I don't know. I don't really keep track of it.
Well, God darn it, think when I ask you a question. That's the whole point, right?
How many articles? Well, I think that consuming the internet, you're reading articles.
That's
You
what
know?
I'm talking about, but I know that I may read 20 blog posts a day and sprinkle in a couple news things. I mean, I probably am right up there with Daniel, reading that many. So, because you're not doing this for a living and you're not online for a living, guess for me. Guess. You're so smart. I bet you could count. 10, 20, 50?
I don't know. Probably about 20, 25.
Yeah. And Joe, what do you think you read?
Probably 15, maybe 20. And what I do when I get overloaded, right? TMI, or it's just too depressing. Is I leave my computer. I just turn it off and go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever get overloaded because you're always working?
Yeah, well, you know what? You know what the funny thing is that because I picked the places where I consume my news, I totally miss stuff that happens like on normal news, like CNN or CBC. So if something really major happened that day and everybody knew about it, I would know because I'm looking at marketing, I'm looking at other types of news and analytics and social media and all that, and so I totally miss the mainstream stuff, which is weird.
So Tiffany, what do you do when you have information overload from all of this? What do you do?
I don't know. I spend a lot of time online for work, but I also spend far more time in emails, and so it's not information overload. It's just I can't walk away from my computer because there's too many things going on. But if I really could shut down, I'd probably just put on some headphones and pick up a book. I actually had to make a conscious decision or find time to start reading again because I missed it, but I decided I was too busy. So now I'm forcing myself to read again because I need a break from all of the work and the research that I've been doing.
And activity, yeah. Okay, so if you could change the way news showed up in your life and what it did and how you got it, because I think, Helen, you're actually doing that. I think Helen, more than anyone, probably is controlling the way they get news. You know, you curate, you know your sources, you know where you're going to turn. But that's a lot of work, right? You kind of remind me of Samantha, who's one of our regulars, who's highly organized and highly research-oriented and thinks about everything. And it's exhausting sometimes when I think about being Samantha, and I love her. She's awesome. But it's a lot of work. If there was a way for you to get news or have news in your life that where you had more control, I mean, does anybody see? Joe, I want you to answer that question because it's your question.
I can answer that. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like curation, because I'm highly selective about the kinds of things that I put in my head, and I'm very selective. Yeah. I get super unhappy when I have to read a crappy, shitty marketing blog. Just putting it out there, people.
Ours, by the way, he's not talking about our company.
No, we're fine. But I resent, those lists that are like 5 things you should know about who gives a damn. And that's where I get fired up. I think that news does the same thing, and I think it's sort of and really, really disturbing to the individual over time because it messes us up. So my answer to that question is, I would like to see more. I would like to see more like interactivity with news where you get to define how you actually experience it, what type of content you get, and you get to sort of shape that over time. To me, that would be just magical.
Instead of having Facebook do it for you, Daniel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because that's what's happening when you're inside of a social network and things are coming at you and it's not under your control. So yeah. Sorry, I think I have information overload from tonight. Just think about. Okay, let's go to local versus national. This is another one of Joe's questions as well. Is there one? Okay, I lived in northeastern PA. The news station up there at WNEP is like the most phenomenal local news ever. I know it's bizarre. I know Scranton gets a lot of crap, but incredible. I miss it no matter where I live. I miss how professional and how good the news is up there because I think they do a really thorough job. It seems not political and it's not hysterical. All those things we were talking about wanting out of a news. So when I was living there, I was consuming a lot of local news and avoiding the national news. But I don't live there anymore, and I'm back to crap local news here. here. So I wonder, how much do you consume locally versus national? Like Tiffany, you're in Austin, a weird and funky place where there's a lot going on. Do you pay more attention to local than you do national, or even global?
I'd say I probably still pay more attention to national, international if you were looking at just sheer number, but part of the other issue for me is for my job, I have to stay up to date on local. So there's not a big part of the personal decision to do it because I need to know what's going on politically and economically in my city and in the state of Texas. And also for my job, I'm on local media and I'm pitching local media. So I need to know what they're covering and what they're interested in so that I can do my job better.
Okay. Kieran, you answer that for me. So since you're not watching television and you're listening, you're paying attention to a lot of foreign news or foreign news sources, do you pay attention to local central Pennsylvania news?
I mean, I don't really care about central Pennsylvania news. You know, oh, a cow crossed the road. You know, but there's a university newspaper. You know, and I don't. I technically live in eastern Pennsylvania now, which is kind of weird to think of. But yeah, I mean, there's a school newspaper, and they post a bunch of dumb shit. So I have a lot to say about those type of posts.
So
And,
so we've talked a lot about Yik Yak, and what's the other app that you're on a lot? Not the Hot or Not one, but the swipe one where you say whether someone's.
I just use the Yik Yak.
Okay, so how much time do you spend on Yik Yak versus consuming news?
Well, I mean, whenever you're sitting on a toilet, it's pretty, convenient time to use the Yik Yak. In fact,
Okay.
I can literally, you know how we're having this think tank right now? Well, the people who develop these apps are having the exact same think tank, and they're thinking, how can we get people to associate toilet time with our app?
Oh, for God's sake. Well, I guess that's what magazines did for eons. I mean, my father was famous for that, so I guess it's funny, but it's sort of following the traditional route. All right, Joe, especially because you're really involved in some of your local news, how much time do you spend paying attention to local versus national?
Well, I mean, I make myself deal with some of the crappiness of local news because it does relate to my life, right? It's relevant in a way that national news isn't always. So I would say it's probably 50-50 and by choice.
And Hessie, do you pay attention to any local news? You don't know who your mayor is.
Well, that's Pickering. Like, who wants to know who the mayor of Pickering is?
But you know what I'm seeing here, though? Here's the thing. Like, Kieran made the joke about a cow crossing the road, and one thing that was interesting for me living in northeastern PA is it's a low crime rate, so they did other news stories. It wasn't just violence, violence, murder, murder, which can be incredibly exhausting and difficult to listen to. And in rural areas like Pickering, which is relatively safe, you don't have those sort of stories.
Yeah.
I mean, even not that local. I don't mean.
Well, we have Toronto news. I do watch that. But for the most part, I mean, I will turn to the national news at 6 o'clock. I mean, I think that's more important. Yes, a lot of the local news is all about somebody who got hit by a bus. That's what happened tonight. Like, yes, that's important, but I mean, for me, it's not as important. So I tend to consume like maybe 80% of it more nationally than anything else.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the ridiculous chat that's going on over there. Helen, since you're into all sorts of news, how much local news? I mean, Toronto's got such fascinating local political news.
For now. For now. It won't, as I did the joke earlier, I stand by this. Like, we basically elected the mayor equivalent of Bermuda shorts. Like we elected everybody's dad as our mayor, and so I don't think it's going to be like this forever. In fact, I think that was actually a great awkwardness for us because we're always sort of known as like Toronto the bland, and like things. Or is it people like about New York? And then all of a sudden we got this crazy crackhead mayor, and all of a sudden we started paying attention to us. We're like, no, not for that. Like, there's so many others. It's so clean here. Everyone's so nice. So I don't think anyone's going to care about us soon. I care about local politics because and local news because it affects my life directly. And I think more people should care. We should care even when our mayor is not an idiot. But at the same time, you know, it's at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure no one will care about us soon, and it'll just be a matter of people, you know, tagging dicks on cop cars again, and that'll be the big news story.
All right, so Daniel, since you don't watch cable TV, how much local news do you consume? Because you have a very global, yeah, I mean, Steam Feed is global, definitely. Every week it seems like it's more global.
Yeah.
So how much local news do you consume?
I like everybody else. I probably consume more national and international news. The local news that I tend to consume now is not actually Toronto news, but news from the Maritimes, the east coast of Canada, where all my friends and family live, and I kind of want to figure out, okay, what's going on back home.
Sure.
So that's more of the local news that I'll consume, but yeah, I'll still get some Toronto news through like my feeds and people at work, but most of the news that I do consume is like everyone else, national and international.
Okay, so all right, so it's 9 o'clock. Wow, it might have been some dry questions, but it's kind of fascinating to me. I'm really interested to see. I hope we do this for a long time, this think tank, and I hope we stay connected to all these thinkers for a long time, because I'm interested to see how this changes as you become more economically stable, but also as you have families and things change where certain issues become more important. You know, I never gave a crap about the school board, and I certainly care now because I have a daughter in the system, that sort of stuff. So it'll be interesting to watch. And it's 9:01. Darn it, we ran over again. I can't blame anybody but myself this time. So everybody on the Hangout, stay if you want to hang out. And thanks anybody who's watching. And say goodnight, Millennials.